When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel. Today's video, we're going to be going through every single POV character. This includes the prologue and the epilogues of the books, and ranking them from 31 to 1. But before we get into the video, if you guys like to like, subscribe, and comment, please do. It helps channel reach other people that might like this content as well. And let's get into the video. So kind of for consistency's sake, the 31 through 22 will be the chapters that were only, one chapter for POV. So these are mostly going to be the epilogue and the prologue. And there is one character that I'll talk about when I get there that does have multiple chapters, but I will get there when I get there. So number 31, this actually is not an epilogue and prologue chapter, but it's ASOIAF. If you don't know, this is one of the Kingsguard that ends up going with Myrcella, and I just don't like his character, if you want me to be honest. He's definitely being manipulated by Ariane and all that stuff, and he just kind of comes across as an idiot in my opinion. If you guys like this chapter, let me know. I'm not a fan of the character, so again, this is why this character is going to be lower for me. I also want to say, this is not ranking the characters individually, but what their POVs offered to the story. So, for instance, if we talk about a Catelyn character who will be on this list at some point, they will be higher because of what their story entailed, what was in their story, but not necessarily because of the character, because if I was going off of the character, she would probably be closer to the bottom. But, yeah. Now, getting into 30, we have the prologue of A Dance with Dragons, Varamir. He's a skin changer, and again, I just wasn't a big fan of this prologue compared to other prologues that I think are better, or epilogues as well. So that is kind of why this one's a little lower, and that's kind of how it's going to be on these early ones because they're all one chapter. So it's kind of ranked on how I liked that one singular chapter compared to someone else's. Now, number 29, this will be Chet, and his chapter is the prologue of A Storm of Swords. And I really like this chapter, even though it is this low. It's kind of showing the descent already going on within the Night's Watch already, and that Sam quite possibly was going to die in this chapter until we have the others come and all that stuff. So a really interesting chapter, and I kind of liked how it kickstarted just Storm of Swords, where we had the betraying going on, and a lot of death in that book, especially. 28 is ASOIAF. I think ASOIAF has 2 chapters, if I'm not mistaken, one in Feast and one with Dance, and they're fine. ASOIAF kind of just serves as our eyes and ears and Dorne while maybe other characters are not present, and that's really what he is. And I like him for that, but again, not really a big influential or impactful character within the story. 27 is going to be Pate. Now, I really like Pate. I really like the beginning chapter of Feast for Crows because it's something we don't kind of see. This is kind of a common person, right? Pate is someone that is almost a commoner, and we get to hear this kind of interesting things where we know what's going on with Dany, but we have all these other characters that have no idea what's going on. And we kind of see how the common folk think about all the situation going on and Tywin Lannister and all that stuff. It's very interesting, and I really like the perspective we're given here. And we also get the introduction into the Faceless Men that they'll talk about later on. But it's a really good opening chapter for me for Feast for Crows. And it also, even though we only see Pate for one chapter, it's really kind of heartbreaking when he dies at the end. You kind of have some sympathy for him because he's just trying to get the girl that he's basically in love with, and he has to do some kind of morally bad things to do it and get this money, and he ends up dying at the end of the chapter anyway. So unfortunate, but again, I really like this opening chapter. Another opening chapter I really like here is going to be number 26, and it's going to be Cresson. I really like Maester Cresson's introduction into A Clash of Kings, based upon the fact that I think it does a very good job of showing what's been going on with Stannis and kind of laying the foundations of what is going to be one of the more important characters in that book. And I think it comes across really good. Also, some of the things going on in his chapter kind of fuel Maester conspiracy videos, how he's openly trying to play and manipulate what's going on when that's not really what Maesters are supposed to do. So I also like the idea of that as well, that is kind of inherently in this, and how Cresson views Stannis as a kind of a son, really, And I really like the pacing that this chapter sets for that book. Number 25 is going to be Mel. I really like that we actually finally do get a Mel chapter, and we kind of get to see inside of her head a bit and see kind of what's going on. And I think it's a really good chapter to include. And I believe her chapter's in Dance, if I'm not mistaken. I'm pretty sure it is. But she has one chapter, so again, she's another one chapter character, and that's why she's this low. If she had more chapters, she would probably be higher. Number 24 is going to be Merit Frey. Now, this is going to be the epilogue of A Storm of Swords. And I really love this chapter. I know a lot of people might not like this chapter as much as I do, but I love the backstory we get of the Freys. I like that we get to see the Frey perspective and how much infighting there actually is going to be when Walder Frey would die. And I like the lore building that we get through Merit Frey. And you almost feel bad for Merit Frey because he has definitely had a rough life and he's constantly dealing with head issues and stuff like that. And then also in the same chapter, we get that Catelyn's still alive and is Lady Stoneheart, and it kind of kickstarts that whole thing. A really good chapter, and is one of my favorite one-off chapters from any POV character that we get. Number 23 is going to be Kevin Lannister. This is a phenomenal chapter where we see Varys kind of just starting to cause more chaos. And because of that gigantic payoff and kind of what's going on, and Kevin Lannister being told, he's doing a great job ruling the kingdoms and all that, I really like this chapter for that point, and that's kind of why it's up here. I just really like it. I think it's a very, very strong conclusion to Dance with Dragons. Number 22, I had to put Will, the first chapter that we ever get in Game of Thrones, as number 22, and the last of the one-off chapters. I just think a really fantastic and eerie feeling chapter, and our first introduction into the others that a lot of people still theory craft a lot of their stuff off of when it comes to the others. It's just a fantastic chapter, and that's why it's here. So I just put it up at 22. Number 21 is going to be Quentin. So this is when we start getting into characters that have multiple chapters and are more of a important POV character. Quentin, I just didn't care too much about. He does give us a lot of world building as well, but I'm just going to be honest. He has 4 chapters, I believe, in Feast, and I just didn't see him as that big of a character, and he ends up kind of going out like a bitch as well. But I mean, again, Quentin, not one of my favorite characters. 20, Aaron Greyjoy. I'm not a fan of the Greyjoys for the most part, besides a couple characters. But I'm not a big fan of the Iron Islands, and Aaron Greyjoy, I think his introductory chapter, where it's the second chapter of Feast, it's pretty decent in kind of setting up the Greyjoy plot and the Iron Island plot for the book. But it just, I don't know. I'm not a big fan of the character, and really, not a ton is really going on in that first chapter anyway. Really, the big thing that we get out of it is the Kingsmoot and kind of learning that Euron Greyjoy has taken the seat of power at this point. Number 19, number 19 is Asha. We get a couple Asha chapters in Feast, and then we get a couple more there in Dance, and then she's also had some wins. I'm not actually going to include Winds of Winter chapters into how I evaluate this ranking, just based upon things could change in all of those chapters, so I don't want to really focus on those. But I like Asha Greyjoy's chapter. She has the Deepwood Motte kind of chapter where Stannis is coming. It's a really good chapter. And overall, I just like her more than Aeron Greyjoy's kind of chapter, so that's why she's a little bit ahead. Now, this one might come as a shock, because this is one of the characters that has the most amount of chapters in the story, and it's going to be Bran. I just do not like Bran. I'll be completely honest. Bran, to me, feels like the pace just slows so much. After really, I'd say Clash of Kings, Bran to me is a character that I do not want to see as the next chapter. Because I know the pace is going to get slowed down so much. Nothing happens except Bran is getting dragged along somewhere. There's some Bran chapters that are fine and they're okay, but it's because of other characters are involved, right? I just personally don't care for Bran. I think we could just leave it to where, he goes past the wall and he goes to some place and then boom, he comes back. I just feel like he's given way too many chapters where it just feels like filler almost. I'm just not a fan of Bran. I hope he gets paid off in Winds and Winds and Dream of Spring, where it makes it feel worth it. But Bran chapters, I almost want to skip to a point. The only reason he's higher than some of these other characters is because we get so many of his chapters that some of them are pretty decent and give us good background information. Like the Night of the Laughing Tree, that's a good chapter with Bran in it. A lot of Bran's earlier chapters are pretty good with foreshadowing for the story and stuff like that. But that is why he is at 18. Number 17 is going to be Victarion. Now, Victarion to me is just a badass, and I really just like Victarion as a character. He's not the smartest, but I just think he's a very intriguing character, in my opinion. Everything that kind of happens with his arm and how that kind of gets remedied and all that stuff. I just think Victarion is just a badass, cool character. When we go to his chapters, you kind of know what you're getting, and I like that about his character. So that is number 17. Now, the next almost 3 rankings, if they had more chapters, would probably be ahead because I like all 3 of their characters. But number 16 is going to be Arianne. I really like Arianne chapters. I like how she's playing the game. It almost feels like King's Landing with Tyrion, but in Dorne, and with Arianne and how she's using it as a female and gaining power, unlike people like Cersei, who are terrible at this. So I love Arianne's chapters in that regard. We only get a couple, but I'm looking forward to her getting more chapters and wins, and hopefully all that plays out. But it's kind of, I'm going to use the same kind of argument for the next 3, but number 15 is Jon Con. There's probably a bias here. I just think Aegon Targaryen, whatever you want to call him, is very intriguing. I am very intrigued with that plot line. So that is why whenever I see Jon Con chapters, we have very few of them, I'm just happy. I like to see that we're seeing another player in the game who is going to be someone that's going to be a very big player coming into wins. And I just like Jon Con's insight, right? Because he was somebody that was in Robert's Rebellion. He was someone that was fighting for the Targaryens, which is very different. We don't get that a lot. So I really like that whole idea. Number 14 is Barristan the Bold. I love how Barristan is kind of trying to rule in Dany's stead. And I like kind of being inside Barristan's mind, right? Barristan's a very intriguing character. He's one of the greatest swordsmen to ever live. And I just like Barristan. He has a few more chapters than Jon Con and Arianne, so that is why he's ahead of them. But I love all those characters. Number 13 is going to be Sam. Now, Sam is a mixed bag for me because I love Sam's chapters in A Storm of Swords. I think he has some of the best chapters in that book. Everything from his recounting of the Fist of the First Men, or you have another chapter where he's killing the other. Just his whole journey back to the wall, I think, is very intriguing. And his last chapter in Storm, where he's basically manipulating people to get Jon as the, Lord Commander, I think is one of the best chapters in the books and as a whole. So that is why he's 13 from the good point of view. Now, the bad is, I don't think Sam's that great in the next book he's in. His whole journey where he leaves the wall and all that stuff, I just don't find it that interesting. And it's almost to the Bran level where I feel like it's almost filler. But yeah, so that's why Sam's a bit lower. If Sam didn't have just such a drastic change for me, I think he'd be a lot higher. But because of that, I really can't put him above some of these other characters. Now, 12, this one might be kind of controversial having this character over Sam, but I have Brienne. I am one of those people that actually likes Brienne, or like her little journey and how she's trying to get Sansa and Arya, and I kind of like how it's almost like a mystery trying to track them down, and we see Brienne kind of interact with a variety of different characters that is pretty cool. And also, I think the world building with Brienne is pretty good as well. And even the ending of her, her last chapter where it's like, she meets Lady Stoneheart and Cat, I think is fantastic. Really great payoff to her storyline. So I really like Brienne for the most part, and I'm excited to see where that whole storyline goes with in the next few books. Number 11. Now, Sansa's a hard one because, again, Sansa's another one of our POV characters that has some of the most chapters throughout the entire series. But she is not a likable character, and I don't like her in most of the chapters. For the most part, I do not like Sansa until the end of Storm of Swords when she's with Littlefinger, and then into the next books. That is the only time I really like Sansa. But the thing is, and why I think she has to be higher, is because of what is going on around Sansa. You know, being in King's Landing, being one of our main POVs into what's going on. And King's Landing, to me, is always the most intriguing place in the entire story. So Sansa kind of being a part of that, and us getting information through Sansa, is why she has to be higher than some of these other characters. Number 10, I have Theon. Now, I really, really like Theon's POV chapters in Clash. I think having that insight of why Theon's making these decisions and who Theon is almost pretending to be, and how he's trying so desperately to get his father's approval, and seeing him slowly kind of break down and lose, you know, the castle and all that stuff. And then it gets even better when we go to Theon when he's Reek. And he's just a completely different character. He's been broken down mentally and emotionally. And to see him kind of climb back up a bit to where we have these same chapters in Winds of Winter where he's starting to break out of that Reek persona. I really like Theon's story. I think he has a very strong story. It's just, again, he's missing POVs from 2 very big books. And he just doesn't have as much chapters as a lot of the other characters on the list. Number 8, I have Cersei. So Cersei, I really like that we get her inside her head in Feast for Crows and a little bit into Dance with the Dragons. I think she has a couple of chapters, maybe 1 or 2 in Dance. But we get to see what's really going on with Cersei. What is motivating her? What makes her kind of this evil woman that she is? And what's going on there? Like, why does she do the things she does? And I think seeing Cersei slowly but mentally just break, and seeing her losing power while trying so hard to just keep it, it's a really interesting story, as well as I believe that she is the only POV character within King's Landing after Jaime leaves and all that. So again, it makes her character extremely interesting. The only reason she's lower on here is, again, only appearing in 1 book and then having 1 or 2 chapters in a second book kind of holds her down from the rest of the pack. Number 8. I don't know if I said the numbers right because I'm looking at a doc and I actually switched these. But number 9 is Cersei. Number 8 is Dany. Now, Dany, I've made this well clear on the channel. She is not one of my favorite characters. I think she's a good character, don't get me wrong. But again, not for me. But Dany is, again, a mixed bag. She's kind of like Sam in a way, because I love Dany in A Storm of Swords, and then I like her ruling, right? I like her in Dance, where we see her struggling to rule, and I think that is very good for Dany. We know she's a good conqueror, but seeing her struggle and trying to overcome all these difficulties of ruling is really, really good. I know people do not like Dany in Dance with Dragons because of that, and they find her kind of boring and stuff, and I can see that as well. I think Dany as well in Dance is very much, she's always thinking about Dario, and I don't know, I get it, I know why she would feel like that, but I feel like it just takes me out of it sometimes, where I don't know, that's what I'm gonna say for Dany. But I think Dany, the problem for me and why she's so much lower is Dany in the first and second book, for me, she is just a slow character. Right, the second book, it just feels like she's wandering around, right? And then she gets to Karth, and I don't know, she's just not an interesting character in book 2. With that being said, she has one of the best chapters of any of the books in the House of the Undying, and she also has another one of the best one when the dragons are hatched. I feel like that is almost the story of Dany, right? Where she has a lot of mediocre to meh chapters, but then she has the top tier chapters in all of the books, so it's very weird to rank her for me. So I had her at 8. Let me know where you guys had her as well. I think she has the 4th most chapters in the book, so yeah, fair ranking around this area is where I thought would be appropriate for her. Number 7 is going to be someone that has far less chapters than Dany, but it's going to be Davos. I really like Davos, and you guys are going to know why, because you guys know Stannis is my favorite character in A Song of Ice and Fire. And Davos, for the most part, is our point of view into Stannis' camp. And I think Davos is just a very smart character in general. And seeing him kind of battling Melisandre for what it feels like 2 books on trying to get Stannis to listen to him and all of that. And then we get in, you know, the later book, Dance with Dragons, where everything with Wyman Manderley is just on point. I am of the thought process that there is not a single bad Davos chapter. You guys may disagree with that, but I think if he had more chapters, I could really realistically put him a lot higher. But because of a lack of chapters compared to the rest of people on this list, I think he has to be number 7. Number 6 is going to be Arya. Now, Arya does have the 3rd most chapters, I believe, in the books, but Arya to me is fantastic. I think Arya has a great arc where she's, you know, trying to be this kind of tomboy type thing in book 1, where she's growing into her own. All the Syrio Forel chapters with Arya are really good, but I think Arya shines in book 2 and book 3. She gets a lot of chapters. I think she has the most amount of chapters in book 3, but her journeying through the Riverlands and in Harrenhal and with the Hound and going to the twins and all that, it is fantastic. She has some of the best story in those 2 books. My problem with Arya and why I have her a bit lower is because in the later books, I'm just not a fan of her kind of faceless men training. I'm just not a fan as much as I am to other storylines, so I think she kind of takes a hit there. And then in book 1, I think she's a really good POV as well, but again, she has limited chapters, and a lot of them are not as impactful as I feel like the top 5 are. Number 5 is going to be Cat. Now, again, Catelyn is a character I do not like, right? I don't like Catelyn, but I can't deny she is always involved in a lot of my favorite chapters. The Red Wedding is my favorite chapter. She is our POV character in there. If you also look at the POV, she's the POV in the Renly and Stannis meeting. And that, again, is, I think, a top 10, 15 chapter. Everything that Catelyn does just seems like it's at a front of the biggest part of the story. She's our look into Robb's camp. She captures Tyrion in book 1, which is really stupid, by the way, but we're not going to go there. She's a big POV in book 1, a big POV in book 2, big POV in book 3. She gets held down because, again, she dies. Well, she comes back, but she's not a POV. But yeah, I think all of her chapters are really good world building, as in we learn a lot of information through Catelyn, and then we really move along the plot a lot in Catelyn chapters as well. Number 4 is going to be Ned. Now, Ned only has 15 chapters throughout the entire series because, I guess, spoiler alert, he dies in book 1. But Ned's chapters are so impactful to building the world, to the entire A Song of Ice and Fire. He, for one, gets beheaded and starts pretty much has the entire conflict for the rest of the books. He gives us so much background information into Robert's Rebellion. A lot of people, when we talk about what happened to the Tower of Joy, what happened here, or anything in Robert's Rebellion, we always go back to Ned chapters. And his kind of moral code is our first kind of indication that these honorable people do not win. And we see how he has a lasting effect on his children, and it's constantly referenced. So I think as big of an influence as Ned was on the entire series, he had to be this high. Number 3 is going to be Jaime. Now, I know Jaime is only introduced as a POV in Storm, but I think his entire journey after being released by Cat is just fantastic writing. We go from Jaime being one of the most hated characters in the entire book series to a fan favorite. Think about how much work had to happen from that book, or I guess from book 1, where he's hated, to you're in book 3 and you're starting to actually like Jaime. We start to get more of what happened during the Mad King's reign and towards the end, and even past that, right? This is one of the few characters that I don't think has this, really good, and then kind of gets a little meh. Jaime continues. I think everything he does in the Riverlands when he's in control of the Lannister army, everything at River Run with the other, lords of the Riverlands, I think it's fantastic writing, and I really love all of Jaime's scenes where he's starting to break away from Cersei. And I think Jaime has one of the, if not the best story arc of the entire book series. So yeah, that is why he is at number 3. Number 2 is going to be John. Now, John, I really don't have anything bad to say about John. I think he has the most. He's either 1 or 2. Him and number 1, I have the most POV chapters. I think he's 2 actually. But John has just a fantastic story from book 1 to book 5. Like book 1, it's him kind of coming into his own, taking on responsibility and becoming this man of the Night's Watch, putting aside his family, going north of the wall in book 2 to where he goes on this mission with Corrin Halfhand and he's got to live with the wildlings for a while, to book 3 where he's coming back to the wall and the watch, and we have these big battle scenes and Stannis comes in and he gets elected to be, you know, the Lord Commander. And then book 5, it's him trying to rule, trying to understand how to manage people, and we see how that flops and how he's not good at that, and then he ends up dying by the end of the book. So I think John doesn't really have a bad moment in the entire books. I don't think John, with having the second most amount of chapters, really has a bad chapter or a meh chapter. I think most of his chapters are extremely interesting and really good. So that is why he's number 2. Number 1 is going to be Tyrion. I don't think there is another character you could put here. I think if you look at the first 3 books, he is the strongest character out of all 3. Book 2 and book 3, he's one of our main POVs in King's Landing, when King's Landing is at its like peak content and exciting stuff going on. We have him in book 1, where it's super interesting, where he goes to the wall, then he's coming back, and then he gets caught by Catelyn and all that stuff, high stakes situations. We see constantly how Tyrion's able to talk his way out of situations, how clever he is, how witty he is. And I think where most people might disagree with Tyrion being number 1 is Dance. His journey from, you know, being in King's Landing, the most, I think, exciting and fun part of the entire Westeros and of the POV characters, to kind of the Dany area, where sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad chapters, or they don't mean a bunch, you know? And to me, Tyrion, I like his journey. I know people have criticized Tyrion's character, but I think it makes a lot of sense for Tyrion to be the way he is in that book. Think about what has happened. He's killed his father. The only person he really thought loved him in this world, that being Jaime, lied to him, something that was very, very deep to Tyrion and something that hurt him a ton. His sister basically killed him, more or less, and the person that he was kind of having a relationship with, Shay, sleeps with his father. And then he finds out Tysha, the woman that he marries, literally actually loved him. It wasn't like she was a whore. That is enough to drive someone mad and go into a state of deep depression, which we do see with Tyrion. And I think I like the change of character. That's how it should be. Tyrion should not stay the same like he did in the show. He should be a vastly different character. And with that being said, I like that Tyrion, even in this state, is able to figure out who Jon Con is, who Aegon is. I like all that stuff. And I like still seeing that Tyrion is able to outwit characters and all that stuff. So for me, Tyrion is number 1 for me. He has the most chapters in the books. And that is it. That is my ranking of the top, or I guess top, but all of the POV characters in general. Did I get this list right? Did I get it wrong? Let me know what you guys think. Let me know what your guys' lists are down in the comments, and I will see you guys on the next video. Bye, guys.
If you think this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention.